What if I told you that fluffy white snow was a blessing for Native Americans, while quiet autumn rain was a death sentence? In folk tales, winter is often depicted as an endless blizzard that sweeps away everything in its path. However, the true horror lay not in the snowdrifts, but in the transparent drops of water falling from the cold sky. These icy needles of rain were capable of destroying an entire settlement much faster than the most severe frost. Watch the video to the end to find out how one rainy night changed the course of the tribe's history and why moisture was more terrifying than any weapon. I will reveal the most closely guarded secret of survival in the wild, known for centuries by the Lakota and Cheyenne. The main danger of cold rain was its ability to instantly deprive the human body of heat through direct conduction. Water conducts heat dozens of times faster than air. This made being out in the rain at temperatures just above freezing a deadly ordeal. Snow, being porous and dry in severe frost, was actually an excellent insulator for the body. It retained a thin layer of air against the skin and prevented heat from escaping into the environment. Rain, on the other hand, instantly soaked through deerskin clothing, turning it into a heavy, icy lump. Wet skin sucked the life out of a warrior much faster than any wind. In such conditions, dangerous hypothermia crept up on a person unnoticed. It deprived the hunter of the ability to move and think clearly in a matter of hours or even minutes. The body expended enormous resources trying to warm its wet limbs. This phenomenon turned an ordinary outing into a desperate struggle for physical survival. When wet natural materials lost their protective properties almost completely, suede and fur became conductors of cold, clinging tightly to the surface of the body. The layer of air that was supposed to keep them warm was replaced by an icy film of water. The indigenous people understood this physics perfectly and feared rain more than snowfall. Death from hypothermia in wet weather occurred even at above freezing temperatures. A slight breeze was enough to accelerate the evaporation of moisture from clothing. This led to a critical drop in the temperature of internal organs. People fell asleep from exhaustion and never woke up again. The Plains Indians called this condition water spirits stealing breath. They noticed how strong men lost their strength after a short stay in the rain. Cold water literally sucked the spark of life out of every joint. Therefore, preventing getting wet was at the top of the list of survival skills. Rain turning into sleet or drizzle was especially dangerous. Tiny drops penetrated even the tightest seams of leather jackets and pants. They created the effect of a constant cooling compress on the chest and back. A warrior might not notice the danger until his muscles began to shake uncontrollably. Shivering was the body's last warning of a critical loss of internal energy. If a person did not find warmth after that, a phase of indifference and coma set in. With dry snow, such a sharp decline in strength almost never occurred. Snow could simply be shaken off the shoulders, remaining dry inside. Moisture also made it impossible to quickly warm up the body through physical activity. Moving in wet clothes required twice as much effort due to the weight of the water. The muscles became clogged with lactic acid and refused to obey their owner's will. This turned any athlete into a helpless and slow old man. I'm very interested to hear your opinion on this fact. Do you think that modern technology has made us too pampered compared to the people of that time? Write about it in the comments. Be sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss new discoveries from the lives of great tribes. The traditional dwelling of the plains nomads, the tipi, was a true masterpiece of engineering, designed for life in a harsh and unpredictable climate. Its shape and materials were chosen so that people could survive in conditions of strong winds, cold and sudden temperature changes. The tipi was easy to take apart and put back together, which was super important for a nomadic lifestyle. At the same time, it stayed strong and stable even on open plains. The teepee's design was ideal for protection from strong winds and heavy winter snow. Its conical shape allowed air currents to flow freely around the walls without destroying the dwelling. Snow did not accumulate on top but slid down without creating unnecessary load. During the cold season, this provided a feeling of relative safety and comfort inside. However, prolonged cold rain revealed the hidden vulnerabilities of this ancient design. Unlike snow, water behaved very differently and became a real challenge. Rain could fall for hours or even days without interruption. At such times, even the most well-designed dwelling began to let its inhabitants down. The main problem was the smoke hole at the top of the cone. This hole was vital, as without it, it was impossible to keep a fire going inside. But it was through this hole that the rain found its way inside. It was impossible to close it completely, otherwise people risked suffocating from the smoke. Even with special valves, moisture inevitably penetrated inside during heavy rain. These valves worked well in wind and snow, but rain easily seeped between them. Streams of water found weak spots in the structure. Over time, drops began to seep inside. The long poles that adjusted the valves became gutters for the flowing water. The water flowed straight down them without encountering any obstacles. The drops fell into the center of the dwelling, where the hearth was usually located. This place was considered the most important and warmest, but it was the first to suffer. Snow simply rolled down the steep walls made of buffalo hides without penetrating inside. It even helped to retain heat by accumulating outside. This layer of snow acted as a natural thermos. Inside the teepee, the temperature remained more stable. Rain, on the other hand, caused the hides to stretch and become very heavy. The wet hides lost their density and began to sag. Under their own weight, they pulled the fastenings down. Water could seep through the joints and peg holes. The inside of the dwelling became damp, making it impossible to sleep well and deeply. The air was heavy and cold. Clothes and personal belongings remained constantly damp. People woke up tired and cold. The fur beds absorbed moisture from the air and became cold to the touch. Even thick skins no longer protected against the cold. Lying down on such a bed meant quickly getting cold. Without proper rest, the warriors could not regain their strength for hunting and traveling. The constant dampness weighed on people much more than the steady dry frost. It was possible to get used to the cold and protect oneself with layers of clothing, but the dampness penetrated everywhere and made it impossible to warm up. It sapped strength and morale day after day. It was extremely difficult to build a large fire for drying in the pouring rain. The wood quickly became wet and did not burn well. Even if the fire could be maintained, it was weak. It did not provide enough heat to dry everything around it. The smoke did not escape well through the upper opening of the teepee due to the high humidity. It sank down and filled the entire space. The dwelling quickly filled with acrid smoke. It made their eyes water and their throats tickle. People had to choose between the cold and suffocating smoke. Sometimes the fire had to be extinguished just to be able to breathe. At such times, it became especially difficult inside. This was one of the most unpleasant trials of rainy weather. The Indians often used an inner canopy to divert water droplets away from their sleeping areas. This canopy was hung inside and provided additional protection. Water ran down it without getting on people. This helped to keep at least part of the space dry. This canopy created a second wall, along which condensation flowed directly to the ground. Thanks to this, it was a little warmer inside. However, during very long rains, even this trick stopped working reliably. Moisture gradually saturated everything around. The moisture reached the food supplies and dry clothes. Meat and skins began to spoil. Clothes lost their warming properties. This was dangerous, especially during the cold season. The soil under the teepee also began to absorb water, turning the floor into a dirty mush. It became difficult to walk inside. Mud stuck to feet and clothes. Cleanliness was unattainable in such conditions. This forced people to build platforms out of branches or stones. They tried to raise their sleeping area above the ground. Contact with the cold ground was dangerous, especially during nighttime rest. Contact with the cold ground during sleep was unacceptable for health. The feet and back were the first to suffer from rheumatism during such periods. Diseases developed quickly. In nomadic conditions, it was difficult to treat them. The leather walls of the teepee required long and thorough drying in the sun after rain. They were removed and laid out in an open place. If the weather remained cloudy, the skins could start to deteriorate. An unpleasant smell and mold would appear. This shortened the life of the valuable dwelling, which took months to build. The skins were obtained with great difficulty. Each of them was extremely valuable. Snow was completely harmless to the wall material in this regard. The women of the tribe had to constantly monitor the tension of the skins during a downpour. They checked the fastenings again and again. The skin expanded from the water and could begin to sag. It was necessary to act quickly. They had to replace the pegs and tighten the fastenings of the poles in time. It was hard and dirty work under the icy streams of water. Their hands were freezing and their clothes were soaked through. but the comfort and safety of the whole family depended on it. What do you think was the most important element of the teepee's design for protecting against moisture from below? In the next chapter, you will learn how ancient builders fought this invisible enemy. In the next chapter, you will learn how they coped with this terrible weather. The unique tactic of the Native Americans was to create a dry cocoon inside the camp. The Indians of the northeastern forests, such as the Iroquois, actively used birch bark. It had natural water-repellent properties due to its natural resins. The bark did not rot and remained dry even under the heaviest downpour. Inside their longhouses, they built special raised platforms for sleeping and resting. This allowed them to avoid contact with the cold and damp ground during the rainy season. Firewood was often stored under the platforms, where it remained dry thanks to the heat from the hearths. This multi-level system saved the lives of hundreds of people at a time. The most important secret was the use of skins with the fur facing inwards in high humidity. This created an air layer that could retain heat even when the skin was wet. The fur acted as drainage, preventing water from stagnating on the surface of the body. The skin on the outside took the brunt of the icy drops. They also used bear or deer fat to impregnate their shoes and clothing. The fat created a reliable water-repellent layer that prevented moisture from being absorbed into the pores. It was a primitive but extremely effective analog of modern membrane fabric. After such treatment, moccasins could withstand walking through puddles. At night, warriors tried to sleep in large groups, huddled close together. This minimized heat loss and allowed them to use the collective energy of their bodies. Collective heating was the only way to survive in the absence of dry fuel. Such closeness was a matter of life and death for the entire group. The subarctic Indians built temporary shelters out of spruce branches, laying the branches with the scales facing down. Such a roof worked on the principle of tiles, diverting water away from those sleeping. Even in heavy rain, the inside of such a hut remained relatively dry. This ability to build from whatever was at hand amazed the colonizers. They also knew how to find dry kindling inside rotten trees or under rock overhangs. Their knowledge of the forest allowed them to obtain fire even when everything around them seemed hopelessly wet. Fire was a sacred gift, cherished more than gold on rainy nights. Without a fire, the chances of surviving until dawn were close to zero. The use of certain types of moss helped absorb excess moisture inside shoes. Dry moss acted as a sorbent, absorbing sweat and accidental drops of water from the feet. This prevented frostbite and foot diseases in cold weather. Every plant in the forest had an important function for survival. Clothing made from the intestines of large animals was used by northern peoples as raincoats. This material was completely waterproof and very light to carry. Such raincoats were highly valued and passed down from father to son. They allowed hunters to stand in the rain for hours without the risk of getting wet. Like this if you admire the resilience and ingenuity of the people of that time. Their knowledge of nature surpassed any modern textbook on tourism. Tell us in the comments if you knew about these methods of protection from moisture before. For hunters on the plains, a dry frost of -20 degrees was a real blessing. Such cold was perceived as an understandable and predictable enemy. It was possible to prepare for it in advance by dressing properly and choosing the right pace of movement. In these conditions, people felt in control of the situation. In such cold weather, clothing remained completely dry, retaining its thermal insulation properties. The air between the layers of fabric retained body heat. Nothing drew the cold inside. This was more important than any additional protection. Snow could simply be shaken off with a mitten, without fear of moisture penetrating the seams. Even vigorous movement did not cause clothing to get wet. Leather and fur materials performed reliably. They retained their shape and warmth. This allowed you to spend whole days outdoors without harm to your health. A hunter could walk, wait, track, and return without much risk. The body did not waste extra energy fighting the dampness. The frost was perceived as part of the familiar environment. Freezing rain instantly turned moccasins into wet and heavy rags. Water soaked through the soft leather very quickly. The shoes lost their shape and began to pull down. Each step required more effort. This led to a very rapid loss of sensitivity in the toes and feet. The cold rose from the bottom up. His legs stopped obeying him. The pain was replaced by numbness, and then a complete loss of control. Without warmth in his feet, the hunter lost his mobility and became easy prey. He could not move for long or change direction sharply. Any danger became deadly. Even a normal transition became a risk. He could not pursue an animal or quickly escape from danger. Speed was the key to survival. In the rain, this advantage disappeared. Hunting lost its meaning. The icy crust on the grass after the rain made a loud crunch with every movement. The sound was sharp and distinct. It carried far in the silence of the plains. Stealth immediately disappeared. It revealed the presence of a person hundreds of meters away, making stealth hunting impossible. Any approach to prey became pointless. Even the most experienced hunter could not hide it. Nature itself gave him away. The animals heard the noise and fled deep into the forest long before the man appeared. They changed direction in advance. The prey disappeared, leaving no chance. Time was wasted. Snow, on the other hand, absorbed the sound of footsteps perfectly and helped with camouflage. The soft snow allowed you to move almost silently. This gave the hunter a huge advantage. That is why winter was considered a good time for hunting. Animals also changed their usual behavior in bad weather and took shelter. They tried to conserve their energy. Their movements became rare and cautious. It was much more difficult to find them. They hid in the thickest thickets, where they were difficult to track down. There, the rain was not so noticeable. Traces quickly disappeared. The hunter lost his bearings. Hunters had to spend many times more time searching for prey in the rain. A day could pass without a single chance of success. Strength was lost, and there were no results. This greatly affected endurance. It depleted energy reserves and undermined the tribe's food security. Every unsuccessful outing affected everyone. Supplies were dwindling faster than usual. Weather mistakes were costly. Cold rain not only threatened their lives directly, but also deprived the tribe of food. The danger was not immediate, but gradual. It accumulated day after day. This made the rain especially frightening. Without fresh meat, people grew weak and more vulnerable to disease. Their bodies were less able to withstand the cold. The elderly and children suffered first. The tribe was losing its strength. Winter with rain was considered a time of great hunger and trials for the elders. It was they who had to make difficult decisions. They determined how to distribute the remaining food. A mistake could cost lives. Each such season left a deep mark on the memory of generations. These years were remembered for a long time. Stories were passed on to children. The weather became part of the collective memory. During heavy snowfall, visibility was poor, but the hunters stayed warm. The body retained heat even during long waits. Movement was limited but controlled. The danger felt less acute. Rain, on the other hand, blinded the hunter and forced him to constantly wipe his face and eyes. Water ran down his forehead and nose. His eyes stung from the cold. Concentration dropped sharply. Water seeped down his collar, causing involuntary shivering and distracting him from his goal. Even the slightest movement caused discomfort. His body shrank from the cold. His thoughts became confused. The hunter's alertness was dulled, which could lead to a fatal mistake. One wrong step was dangerous. Losing balance could result in injury. In the rain, the risk increased many times over. Animal tracks on wet ground quickly washed away and became illegible. The water washed away the details. The direction of movement disappeared. Hunting turned into guessing. The hunter lost track of the chase and could get lost in the fog that accompanied the rain. Landmarks disappeared. The space became uniform. This was especially dangerous when alone. Snow, on the other hand, preserved clear paw prints for many hours or even days. The trail told a whole story. It was possible to understand the direction and speed of the animal. This gave confidence. This made winter hunting in the first snow the most productive. The tribe waited for such days. They brought food and peace. It was a time of hope. An ambush in the rain required incredible patience and physical endurance. The body quickly lost heat. Muscles went numb. Willpower was tested. Lying on wet ground was tantamount to slow suicide from hypothermia. Moisture drew heat away very quickly. Even a strong man could not endure it for long. The danger was hidden. The Indians tried to avoid such tactics during prolonged autumn or spring rains. They chose other ways to survive. Hunting was postponed. Life became the priority. The life of a warrior was too precious for such risky maneuvers. Every experienced hunter was worth his weight in gold. The loss of one weakened everyone. Therefore, rain was respected and feared. In the next chapter, you will learn how the weather dictated the conditions of war and peace. In the next chapter, you will learn how they coped with this terrible weather. Are you ready to learn new details about the struggle against the elements? Boughs made of ash or maclura wood are extremely sensitive to high humidity. When exposed to rain, the wood absorbed water and became soft and pliable. Animal tendon bowstrings stretched and completely lost their former elasticity. This made the shot weak, short, and completely inaccurate at the decisive moment. The warrior had to constantly hide his bow under a waterproof leather cloak. This greatly sacrificed his reaction speed in the event of a sudden attack by an enemy or beast. By the time a person took out and drew their weapon, precious seconds were already irretrievably lost. Rain effectively disarmed warriors, turning them into easy targets. Leather quivers could also let moisture into the arrows. Bird feathers quickly became wet, stuck together, and lost their aerodynamic properties. An arrow with wet feathers flew unpredictably and often somersaulted in the air. This deprived the Indians of their main advantage, accuracy at a distance. Stone arrowheads were often attached to the shaft with tendons and resin. When wet for a long time, these fasteners could soften and lose their strength. The arrowhead could remain in the animal's body or simply fall off upon impact. This made the weapon disposable and extremely unreliable in prolonged combat. Metal knives and axes began to rust quickly after contact with water. Soldiers and Indians spent a lot of time constantly cleaning and lubricating them with grease. Rust damaged the cutting edge and made the tool useless for fine work. Caring for metal in conditions of constant dampness became a routine. Moisture penetrated all areas of life, destroying everyday items. Leather bags for storing food could become moldy along with their contents. This threatened the pemmican supplies that were supposed to feed the family during the winter. Food spoilage was worse than any enemy raid. Wooden saddles and horse harness parts also suffered from constant dampness. The wood swelled and could crack after drying, becoming brittle and dangerous. Rawhide straps stretched, making it difficult to control horses reliably in battle. The technical condition of the equipment required constant monitoring by its owner. Cold rain was a time of forced technical regression and silence. Tribes tried not to undertake major movements or military campaigns in such weather. All efforts were focused on maintaining existing resources in working order. Moisture was an invisible enemy, undermining the power of the great tribes from within. Tweed clothing became hard as stone after getting wet and then drying out. It had to be kneaded for a long time with hands or special tools to restore its softness. This required enormous labor on the part of the women of the tribe during the off-season. Rain added work for every member of the community without exception. Fire was the only salvation for wet equipment and people. However, obtaining it in the pouring rain was a real art for the chosen few. Moisture interfered with friction and extinguished sparks before they had time to ignite. Therefore, smoldering coals were carried in special horns, protecting them from dripping water. Constant dampness and lack of heat had a more destructive effect on the psyche than a blizzard. Snowstorms usually did not last long, after which a clear and sunny lull would follow. Cold rain could fall for weeks, plunging the prairies into endless gray twilight. In such conditions, keeping the fire going became the main and most exhausting task. The wood was soaked through with moisture, smoked heavily, and gave off very little heat. This created an atmosphere of constant irritation and discomfort inside the cramped camp. The smoke stung the eyes and interfered with normal communication between family members. People became sullen and less inclined to cooperate on such days. The inability to dry clothes led to apathy and a sharp decline in vitality. In the wild, this condition often preceded illness or even death. The constant noise of water and the absence of sun weighed on the morale of the warriors. They felt powerless in the face of this gray and wet element. Waiting for the rain to end could last too long for their patience. Psychological tension grew with every drop that fell on the roof of a tipi or house. This led to quarrels and disruption of the normal order of life within the community. The weather literally tested the strength of social bonds between people. Many Native American legends associated long rains with the wrath of higher powers or spirits. People sought the causes of their suffering in violations of taboos or insufficient offerings. This gave rise to feelings of guilt and anxiety that interfered with their focus on survival. Rituals to summon the sun became the only consolation for many. The lack of physical activity due to bad weather also had a negative impact on well-being. Men accustomed to movement and hunting were forced to sit within four walls. This led to stagnant energy and increased aggression within the male community. Hunters were eager to set out, but understood the futility and danger of such a step. Children often fell ill during such periods, which added to the anxiety of mothers and healers. The cries and moans of the sick filled the camp, creating a depressing and sad atmosphere. Helping the weak required additional resources, which were already running out. Moisture was the backdrop for the most difficult moments in the life of the tribe. The dampness contributed to the rapid deterioration of art objects and sacred relics. The feathers on headdresses lost their shape, and the paint on shields could run. For Native Americans, the loss of the beauty and symbolism of their weapons was equivalent to the loss of part of their soul. This inflicted deep wounds on their aesthetic and spiritual perception of the world. What do you think was the most difficult thing to endure in conditions of constant dampness? What trial of the spirit seems to you to be the most severe in this struggle with nature? Can we understand the feelings of the people of that time through their struggle for a dry bed? People were forced to spend all their time in cramped, enclosed spaces. This required special etiquette and strict adherence to internal rules of conduct within the teepee. Conflicts arising from cramped conditions could destroy peace within the entire community. The elders closely monitored the mood of the young people, suppressing any signs of disrespect. These days were often used to pass on oral traditions and sacred legends. To the sound of the rain, the elders told stories about the creation of the world and great heroes. This helped distract people from the cold and damp, strengthening their spirits. Teaching the younger generation became the main activity during bad weather. Women were busy with the endless repair of clothes and shoes for the whole family. They used bone needles and sinew, trying to strengthen the seams of the garments as much as possible. Every tear in clothing could cause illness in a husband or child. The women's labor was the basis of the tribe's physical security during the rainy season. The distribution of food became more strict and controlled by the leaders. Replenishing supplies in bad weather was extremely risky and rare. The tribe lived on previously accumulated resources, saving every piece of dried meat. Discipline in eating helped to stretch supplies until the first fair days. Children learned patience and silence by watching their adult relatives work. In the dim light of their dwellings, they learned important crafts by helping their mothers or grandmothers. It was a time of intense socialization and awareness of their role in the community. Young Indians grew up faster during such periods of endurance tests. Paradoxically, periods of forced isolation strengthened internal bonds within the entire tribe. Survival became a collective process where everyone depended on their neighbors. The community became a single organism focused on preserving every human life. Mutual assistance was the only shield against the hostile and wet external environment. The Indians organized games and competitions that did not require much space or movement. This helped to maintain a positive attitude and entertain people who were tired of idleness. Games with bones or verbal riddles were popular with all ages. Laughter in the teepee was the best cure for depression caused by rain. The exchange of experiences between hunters allowed them to develop new tactics for future seasons. They discussed the behavior of animals in the rain and ways to camouflage their presence. It was a kind of theoretical training for young warriors. Knowledge was accumulated and systematized during these long conversations. In summer, tribes preferred open spaces near rivers and lush pastures. It was convenient to graze horses there and easy to get water. The open terrain allowed them to spot danger in advance. Life on the plains gave a feeling of space and freedom. With the arrival of the autumn rains, the camps were moved to sheltered lowlands or forest areas. The open plains quickly became uncomfortable and dangerous. The wind grew stronger, and the rain fell without hindrance. People began to seek shelter in advance. Trees served as a natural barrier against the piercing wind and icy drops. The crowns of the trees blocked some of the rain and softened its force. It was quieter and warmer under the canopy of the forest. This made life much easier in bad weather. The forest provided protection that was impossible to find on the open plain. Even sparse trees changed the feeling of cold. Inside the forest, the rain seemed less severe. This made the camp more bearable for people. However, proximity to water bodies became deadly dangerous due to sudden floods. Autumn rains could fall without stopping. The water rose quickly, leaving no time for hesitation. A mistake was too costly. Small streams could turn into raging torrents within hours, washing away everything in their path. What seemed safe in the morning became a threat by nightfall. The water carried away belongings, tepees, and supplies. Sometimes it carried away people too. The Indians closely monitored the water level, assessing the risk of their camp being flooded. They watched the banks and the color of the water. Experience told them when it was time to leave. Decisions were made quickly and without argument. They avoided floodplains where the soil quickly turned into a boggy swamp. Such land could not support the weight of people and horses. Movement became painful. It was impossible to live in such conditions. The Indians tried to choose rocky or sandy hills at the edge of the forest for their camps. These places looked less comfortable, but they were reliable. Water drained deep into the soil without lingering on the surface. This saved the camp from mud. This type of soil drained excess water better and dried faster after rain. Even after heavy rainfall, the ground remained relatively firm. This made it easier to move around inside the camp. People could rest without constant dampness. The right choice of location kept the floor of the tepee dry even during a downpour. A dry floor meant warmth and health. This directly affected survival. Small details determined the fate of the entire tribe. Mistakes in choosing a location could lead to the loss of all property in one night. Water spared nothing. It was impossible to correct such a mistake. Therefore, the location was chosen with extreme caution. The experience of their ancestors was the only reliable guide in the search for the ideal winter camp. There were no books or maps. All knowledge was stored in people's memories. The mistakes of the past taught caution. The Indians memorized places that had remained safe for many decades and centuries. These campsites were considered time-tested. They returned to them again and again. They became part of the tribe's life. This knowledge of the landscape was passed down as a precious legacy from father to son. Young people were taught to observe and remember. Stories were accompanied by real-life examples. This is how the connection between generations was formed. Every tree and every hill had its own story in the tribe's memory. The landscape was a living map. It was a reminder of survival and loss. People felt like they were part of this land. Having a reliable source of dry firewood nearby was a must for setting up camp. Without fire, the camp couldn't exist. It gave warmth, light, and protection. When it rained, it became twice as important. Tribes looked for places with lots of deadwood or fallen cedars and pines. Such trees provided better quality firewood. They were easier to split and carry. This saved people's energy. The resinous wood of conifers was more resistant to moisture and burned more easily. Even wet logs could be made to burn. This was important during prolonged rains. The fire had to be kept burning. The fire was the heart of the camp, and keeping it going was a priority for everyone. Food was cooked and clothes were dried around it. It brought people together. Without it, life came to a standstill. Protecting the horses was also part of the plan for organizing a winter or rainy camp. Without horses, the tribe lost its mobility. They were a means of hunting and rescue. Their condition was critically important. The animals needed shelter from the wind and access to food under the snow or water. Weakened horses quickly fell ill. They had to be protected. Everyone understood this. The Indians built temporary pens in the forest thickets to protect their faithful helpers. Shrubs and trees served as walls. The horses felt calmer. This reduced losses. The health of the herd was the key to the mobility and survival of the entire tribe. Without it, people became vulnerable. It was impossible to escape danger. Therefore, caring for horses was a constant task. Humidity contributed to the rapid growth of mold and fungus in poorly ventilated areas. This threatened people's health. Odors and diseases appeared quickly. This had to be dealt with every day. People tried to arrange their tepees so that the slightest movement of air would help with ventilation. Even a light breeze was helpful. It carried away dampness and smoke. This improved living conditions. Camp hygiene during the rainy season required special attention from women and healers. They monitored the cleanliness and condition of the people. They tried to detect diseases early. Prevention was more important than treatment. Cleanliness was the key to preventing epidemics within a crowded group of people. In a confined space, disease spread quickly. Mistakes could be fatal. Therefore, order was strictly maintained. Detecting traces of the enemy on the soggy ground was a task of paramount importance for the guards. The safety of the camp depended on observation. Traces spoke louder than words. The earth itself gave away strangers. The wet ground revealed any stranger who tried to approach the camp unnoticed. Every step left a mark. Even caution did not help. This was an advantage for the defenders. The warriors regularly patrolled the perimeter, reading the signs in the mud and broken branches of the bushes. They noticed the slightest changes. Experience allowed them to distinguish a random trace from a threat. Nothing went unnoticed. Their vigilance did not waver even in the heaviest and coldest rain. The danger did not disappear because of the bad weather. On the contrary, the rain could hide the enemy. Therefore, the guards remained at their posts at all times. Shamans and healers used their deep knowledge of herbs to maintain the health of the tribe. They prepared special decoctions that helped maintain the internal heat of the warriors' bodies. Willow bark, the roots of certain plants, and coniferous infusions were in every healer's arsenal. These remedies helped combat the first signs of colds and fevers. Special attention was paid to steam cleansing rituals in special small huts. In conditions of prolonged rain, such procedures were extremely important hygienic protective measures. Hot stones on which water was splashed helped to deeply warm the joints and bones. This prevented the development of rheumatism caused by constant exposure to dampness. Healers also made sure that the diet during these days was as high in calories as possible. They added animal fat, berries, and crushed nuts to food to maintain energy levels. A good diet was the best medicine against exhaustion and apathy in children and the elderly. Physical strength was maintained through a deep understanding of the body's needs in cold weather. Spiritual practices and prayers helped people maintain calm and faith in the best. Shamans performed rituals aimed at expelling evil water spirits from people's homes. This provided psychological support to those who felt depressed due to the bad weather. Faith was as important a tool for survival as a bow or a knife. Healers taught people how to properly care for the skin of their feet and hands in damp conditions. The use of animal ointments prevented the skin from cracking and rotting from water. Constant checking of the condition of the feet was a mandatory procedure for every hunter in the camp. This simple knowledge saved people from disability and long, agonizing pain. Special breathing exercises helped warm the blood before going out into the cold rain. Warriors learned to control their condition through concentration and rhythmic deep breathing. This allowed them to maintain their vigor and clarity of mind longer in extreme conditions. The wisdom of the ancestors combined the physiology, spirit, and practical experience of generations. Sacred amulets and talismans gave people a sense of protection from the invisible dangers of dampness. Every warrior believed in the power of his talisman, which was supposed to protect him from colds. These items were an important part of mental hygiene and self-confidence. Psychological resilience was the foundation of the physical health of the entire community. Healing was not only mysticism, but also a very practical science of survival. Generations of experience allowed the Indians to find answers to the challenges that nature presented them with. They learned to coexist with cold rain without losing their human dignity and strength. Medicine was a shield that protected the future of the great peoples of North America. Snow was a building material, a source of water, and a protective cover for the Indians. Rain, on the other hand, remained an unpredictable and destructive force of nature during the cold season. The history of indigenous peoples is a history of constant adaptation to the most diverse manifestations of climate. They learned not to fight the rain, but to minimize its negative impact. Architecture, clothing, and social norms were tailored for survival in wet conditions. Every person who survived the rainy season became a bearer of invaluable survival experience. This knowledge was passed on as the greatest treasure to subsequent generations of the continent's indigenous peoples. Understanding the dangers of water allows us to better understand the culture of these peoples. Today, we often perceive rain as a minor inconvenience to our comfortable urban lives. We forget that for our ancestors, it was a severe test of endurance. This eternal struggle with moisture and cold shaped the character of many generations of people. It taught them to appreciate a dry bed, the warmth of a fire, and the support of loved ones. Snow brought peace and quiet, while rain brought anxiety, noise, and endless dampness. The Indians respected both of these elements, but prepared for them differently and very carefully. Their survival depended on little things that we don't even notice in our daily lives today. The lessons of the past remind us of the fragility of human life in the face of nature. Studying the daily life of the Lakota, Iroquois, and Cree reveals new facets of human ingenuity. We see how people without modern technology created reliable life support systems. Their example inspires us to study nature and our own capabilities more deeply. The history of the Great Plains is a story of the triumph of reason over harsh reality. Cold rain was a filter through which only the strongest and most organized passed. Weak tribes could not withstand the hardships of dampness and disease, disappearing from the historical scene. Those who survived became even more united and wise in their decisions. The evolution of culture went hand in hand with changes in climate and weather. Thanks to this knowledge, we can take a fresh look at the artifacts in history museums. Behind every leather shirt or tepee lies a struggle against icy raindrops. These are not just everyday items, but tools in the great battle for life on the wild prairies. The legacy of the Native Americans lives on in our memory and respect for their resilience. As we conclude our analysis, it is worth remembering that nature is always stronger than man in a direct confrontation. The only way to win is to understand its laws and follow them wisely. Native Americans were masters of this art of understanding the world around them in all its diversity. Rain was their teacher, and snow was their faithful and kind ally. Cold rain was indeed an invisible killer that required extreme wisdom from the Indians. We have seen how ordinary water could become a more formidable enemy than frost or wild animals. It is amazing how profound the people's knowledge of heat exchange was long before science. Every step they took to protect themselves from dampness was dictated by centuries of bitter experience. Which method of protection from rain do you think was most effective in the wild prairies? Was it the use of fat, birch bark, or collective heating in a close family circle? Write in the comments what other aspects of Native American life you would like to explore in more detail. Your opinion helps us make our content even more interesting and insightful. Suggest topics for future videos that you would like to see on our channel in the near future. We are always open to new ideas and ready to explore the most hidden corners of human history. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on exciting new episodes. Thank you for joining us and exploring the secrets of the Great Plains today.